Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. As usual, I'm going to ask you all to let me know if you all can hear me. So if anybody can message in the chat saying that you all can hear me and see both Tommy and me, it would be great before I start the introduction. Thank you, Mubashir. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second session of the Back to Basics Workshop 2021, where we are talking about the fundamentals of cleaning and soft FM. As you know, this workshop is being organized by Clean Middle East magazine in association with Reza Hygiene. Just a little about the company before we begin. Reza Hygiene is a one-stop provider of hygiene and cleaning solutions for all industries, especially the food chain from farm to fork, healthcare and commerce. Solutions are wide-ranging, innovative and sustainable, with the company taking a highly responsible approach to chemicals. Reza Hygiene also believes in the importance of empowering cleaning personnel with all the knowledge required to carry out cleaning practices efficiently. Clean Middle East magazine is a 14-year-old publication based in Dubai, UAE. It has been responsible for disseminating information to the cleaning and hygiene market since its launch in 2008. And I am Shanti Pipiwala, the editor for Clean Middle East magazine. Before we begin, here are some of the rules of the workshop. As you all know, the workshop comprises 4 sessions spread over 2 months. We completed the first session 2 weeks ago. Each session will be on for 2 hours. As you know, this is our second session, and we will have 2 hours, which will include question and answer sessions. Those participants who attend all 4 sessions will be given a certificate for the same. Now, on your screen, you will see a panel to the right where you can type out any question you have in the questions tab. Like last time, I will pick out those questions, read them out, and also paste them in the chat so that everyone can read it. At any point during the session, we may also call any of you on stage to interact with Tommy, depending on the kind of question he's asking and the answer you have or the query you have regarding that. Let's all take this opportunity to learn and absorb and refresh our memories on various aspects of cleaning and FM services. And now let me introduce you to our presenter for the Back to Basics workshop if you don't already know him. Tommy Taylor is the director at T. Taylor Solutions in the UK. He is an accredited ISSA CIMS and ISSA CIE facilitator. He has had extensive experience in training cleaning and FM companies in the Middle East and continues to raise standards in cleaning through his own company in the UK called T. Taylor Solutions. Tommy has been part of the Clean Middle East family since the last couple of years, and it is our honor to have him conduct this workshop and impart his knowledge and experience to you all across the 4 sessions. So now, without further ado, I hand over the presentation to Tommy. All the best, everyone. Tommy, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Shanti. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me. My name is Tommy Taylor, as you know. As Shanti has said, this is a second session of 4 that we're doing, all 2-hour sessions. And for those of you, as I said, Shanti said, for those of you who don't really know me, I sort of major working in the clean and FM industry. My main focus is really about training and development of the people that work within our industry. I'm passionate about what people do or don't do in terms of delivery of our service within our industry, and more so since last year, since we've had this pandemic. It's been very poignant in terms of where we are as an industry, what we do for our staff to enhance the service they provide for their clients and they provide for you as a service provider. Back here in the UK, predominantly my role is, I do a lot of training, I do a lot of compliance work in terms of looking at my clients' health and safety and things of that nature. So hopefully today you will get something out of what I've got to say. I think that, as what Shanti said, the session is interactive, so I need you to interact with me. And the one thing that I do say to you is that if you've got a question to ask the question, put it in the caption in the panel on your right, and I will try and answer that question. If for some reason I'm not able to answer the question here and now, then I'll try and get you an answer back later on or for the next session, which will be in a couple of weeks' time. So as you said, this session is about 2 hours long. What I'm looking for is to probably take a break somewhere around 10 to, so we can just stretch our legs, have a comfort break if necessary, and we'll go from there. So Before we start, what I'd like to do is just to go over last week. For those of you that last week, for 2 weeks time, 2 weeks before, for those of you that joined me a couple of weeks ago, the subjects that we covered was corporate governance, communication, and health and safety. What I'd like for you to do while I'm talking in this first session is, if you feel that you had a question for that last session and you didn't get it answered, then drop me a line and I'll try and answer that question before we leave today, so you're not left hanging. When you do ask your questions today, please try and make your questions relevant to the topic that we're talking about. If you do go off piece, then Shanti will politely not pose your question because it does not relevant to the rest of the group at the moment, or the subject matter that we've got in hand. So please try to keep your questions relevant. I know that a lot of people have got things on their mind in terms of the whole COVID situation, how we deal with it, etc., etc. I will try to give you the benefit of my experience in terms of doing that, and hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions. So let's move on. So first thing we've got today in terms of the subject matters we're looking at this morning or this afternoon is the compliance documents. Next slide, please, Shanti. Shanti, next slide. Okay, so what we're looking at is compliance documentation. So we're looking at RAMs, COSHH data, COSHH assessment, and training records. Now, most of what I've got to say, and through all these sessions, we'll always come back to training, how you train, what training you deliver, because that really determines what kind of service you're going to deliver. So the top three sections here in terms of RAMs, COSHH data, COSHH assessments are all things that are relevant, but one of the things that we're very poor at is disseminating this information down to our staff, and actually in some cases actually evaluating what's necessary at times. So let's look at the first one. So we're looking at RAMs. So RAMs, for those of you that are not familiar, is an acronym for risk assessment method statements. So the two come hand in hand, because without a method you don't know how to evaluate the particular risk. So what you need to look at first of all, and I always say, is if you've got a particular task, especially a new task or a new piece of equipment, try it out first, see how it works, put it into practice if you were going to use it, write a method based on that particular piece of equipment. Then once you've written that method and you've done that, then you evaluate it by actually putting in your risk assessment. So what we're looking at when we're talking about risk assessments, so let's go. So we got risk assessments are really measured in terms of what a potential hazard is going to be, what the activity. So let's look at an activity, for instance, in our world. So, and we'll align it to the two bullet points below. So if we were going to run a risk assessment on our staff diluting chemicals and storing chemicals, what we need to look at is, how is it done? What methods are we using to decant the chemicals? How do we store the chemicals? Is a chemical stored at the right height? Does a chemical have a proper label on it? Are the staff familiar with that particular chemical? Will you want them to wear gloves, etc., etc.? That kind of scenario. So what we're looking at really is how to measure the risk. And for years, one of the easiest ways that I've been able to teach people how to measure risk and understand what it means by a risk is that every day, no matter what we do, there's an element of risk for that task, whether it be making a cup of tea, whether it's mopping a floor, even going into a shower. There's a risk. You don't necessarily always think about that risk. You're blind to that risk at times. But the most common one I use is crossing the road. So we cross the road, and it's a natural thing for most of us to cross the road, whether we do it properly, whether we sort of do it in haste, it doesn't matter, but there's a risk involved in that particular task. So how do we evaluate the risk? And if you look at this in terms of where we are in terms of cleaning industry, I'm hoping you'll get an indication. So if you're standing on the pavement or the sidewalk and you're ready to cross, and I apologize because we drive on the right-hand side, left-hand side here. So my first thing will be to stand on the corner of the pavement. I then look to my right to see if there's any cars coming or any cyclists are coming towards me. Now, how am I measuring that risk? What I'm looking at is that car far enough away for me to walk across the road safely? Now, the easiest answer is If I do it and I look and I see that that car's in distance and I can walk across the road safely, then that's fine. If I look and I have to run across the road because I think it's quite close, then what you've done is you've increased the risk of you getting hit by that car, because anything could happen between you stepping off the pavement and trying to reach the other side. So all the time when you're doing this, you're measuring the risks in your head in terms of, can I take that risk? Will I get away with it in the end? Will I get to the other side of the road? However, we can't be afforded that luxury in our situation. What we had to do is make sure that we're evaluating the risks all the time. And one of the problems that we have within our industry is that a lot of the risk assessments are measured, they're put into place. Sometimes they're generic, they're not always for the correct site. Sometimes they're generic, and the problem is they're not evaluated through a particular period in time. And what people tend to do is either review them at the end of the year or don't do anything with them at all. Now, here in the UK, and I suspect in the UAE and surrounding areas, it's a legal document. So if there is an accident on site, one of the first things the HSE will say to us is, do you have any risk assessments? Have you conducted a risk evaluation of that particular task? And if the answer is no, you're already on the back foot. If the answer is yes, and you've got one and it's not up to date, well, fine, you've got one. At least you had a starting point. But if you don't have one at all, that's where you have a problem. So what you should be looking at, first of all, is in terms of chemicals, say, for instance, what's the level of exposure? What's the frequency that that chemical will be used? Is it going to be used every day? Is it poured straight from the bottle? Is it used using, do you use it using a Pelican pump? Do you have a dosing machine, etc., etc.? So if we look at the three scenarios, if you've got a chemical bottle or just a bottle and you decant it straight from the bottle, there's an element of risk there. If we go to a Pelican pump, the risk is lower because you're actually measuring out the portion, you're doing it in a proper manner. If you've got a dosing system, that's even better because the likelihood of you getting it wrong is very, very minimal. So the risks are being evaluated. So if we talk about and looking at the first one in terms of, just for a chemical, for instance, what's the frequency of use? So are the staff using it every day? What are they using it for? Are they using it properly? Do they use the correct dilution rates? Because again, if you don't use the correct dilution rates, you can create a problem in terms of too much chemical can cause a problem to a surface. Not enough, you won't kill the bacteria, which is quite poignant in today's environment. What's the duration? How long is it used for? So what is the risk to the member of staff that's involved in using that chemical? What's the risk to the public with that chemical being used? So there's lots of things that you need to look at when you're doing that and when you're evaluating the potential risk. Now, most commonly, the risk factors are measured by the likelihood of something happen or the severity of the risk or the severity should something happen in an accident. So I'll give you an example. Severity is categorized, and this is not the definitive in terms of other scenarios, are normally measured by death, which is obviously the final scenario. Then you have severe trauma, you have broken bones, you have first aid measures, or there's none, or there's minimal injury. Now, as I said, there's no such thing as that. There's no risk to anything. There's a risk to everything, even if it's just a common spillage. So what you have to do is measure that risk against the likelihood of it happening. So how do we get over this particular scenario? So one way we get over the scenario, as I said, is we write a method statement. So a method statement will tell the person who's using the chemical or who's using the buffing machine or who's using the mop, it will tell them how to use it. Generally, what you do is how to care for it first. So in the case of a chemical bottle, putting the cap back on, putting the name of the chemical to the front so people can see where it is, storing at a particular height, in certain cases storing at a particular temperature. If you're using a rotary scrubbing machine, for instance, it's about checking that machine, making sure you've got the right pad, making sure you've got the right machine for the right surface, making sure in most cases that the machine has been pack tested, which is portable appliance tested, making sure that there's visual checks carried out on it before a start. So the staff will make a visual check and actually note if there's anything wrong. All these things help to reduce a potential accident and the risk in terms of when you're working. So if you incorporate that in your method statement, and for those of you that run big sessions or you run in practical training sessions, you'll know all about this. You know, when you actually perform a task, you're actually running it by a particular method. This is how I want you to do it. This is how I want you to perform it. If it's performed in the correct manner, then the risk is reduced. As I said, and keep in mind, there's no such thing as no risk. Everything has a risk attached to it. Whether you get harmed by that particular risk, we don't know. To what level, we also don't know. However, so what we have is from that you'll have a table. From that table you'll have a set of digits which will give you a risk rating, and generally, and if I can show you here, if you can see it on the screen, you can see here we've got risk ratings there. Okay, in your case it's backwards. Thank you, Shanti. And what you've got on that risk rating, if you can, from there, the red area is the area that's classed as being danger. So what you should be trying to do is evaluating that particular risk, and you need to drag that risk back down into a green or yellow area. However, the key to it, as I said, is to making sure that you're actually evaluating the risk all the time. Don't just do it once and leave it there. And remember, every situation is different. Every building is going to be different. If you're cleaning inside, it's different to cleaning outside. So one risk assessment does not fit all. You need to remember that. Keep that in mind. Now, I'm not going to denigrate anybody in particular, but in my line of work, what I generally tend to find is that the people that are our health and safety managers in certain companies, the problem they've got is they don't have any cleaning experience. So they should be relying on the middle managers, senior managers to be able to tell them how a particular task works in a particular situation, what you're using, what you're not going to use. If you leave it to somebody who's not familiar with it, then that's where the problems arise. So looking at your risk assessments and your method statements, key thing, keep them updated, first of all, right? So by keeping them updated, what you're doing is by keeping them updated, what you're doing is in making them relevant for the time and reducing the potential risk. Evaluate your method statements. If something changes, as circumstances changes, even the time of day that cleaning practice may happen, you need to look at your method statement. So I'm going to give you a quick example or two quick examples. If you're working in the shopping mall, for instance, now for most of us, you know, if you're cleaning during the day when you've got your clients around, it's completely different if you're cleaning when the store is closed. So the risk assessment should reflect that. However, there's basic rules. Warning signs always should be used, without a doubt. Staff should always be wearing the correct PPE to perform that task. Equipment should be checked to make sure it's functional, making sure it's right for the job that we're doing, and making sure that it's intact and it's not broken. Okay? In this particular case, in the scenario that we're in, the pandemic, you should be checking the health of your staff, making sure that your staff are healthy. If you see signs that they may be ill, you know, the usual flu-like symptoms with COVID, etc., you need to be aware of that. That is a potential risk, not only to you, not only to their colleagues, but the general public if that's the case. So you need to be able to do that. So the RAMs, and I suspect that most of you now in the organizations that you're in have had or should have created RAMs that are relevant to cleaning for COVID, etc., regardless of the situation. So remember the phrase that we're using now, we're not cleaning for aesthetics, we're not cleaning for looks now, we're cleaning for our health. So please make sure that they're up to date, make sure that they're relevant, and make sure they're checked on a regular basis. So let's look at COSHH data. So COSHH data and cost assessments are two slightly different things, but have a similar function in terms of where they go. So the COSHH data is generally the data, or for most of you would know that as MSDS or method safety data sheets or method safety sheets now. So, you know, whatever they're called in your region. So you should have, for all chemicals, should have a COSHH data sheet. That COSHH data sheet, for it to be relevant, again, in most of the countries in the UAE, around Europe, etc., each COSHH data sheet has 16 relevant points on that COSHH data sheet. The most relevant point, to be perfectly frank, to start with, is point 1, which identifies the name of the chemical and where it comes from, because you need to match that up with the chemical that you've got. So again, it's not necessarily your responsibility to keep that COSHH data sheet updated, but what you should be doing again is making sure it's relevant. If you've got all the chemicals within your organization, you should have a COSHH data sheet for, including photocopy ink or powder or whatever the case you use. Something as simple as that. Always have a COSHH data sheet. Remember the 16 points. And then what you need to be doing is training that information down to your staff. Now, when you train that down to your staff, you're not asking them to look at the chemical compounds. You're not asking them the sort of high points in terms of the toxicity and stuff of that nature. What you need to be looking at is the basics. As said, they need to identify what the sheet is. They should identify what the first aid measures are, because if there's an accident on site, which we hope if you do your risk assessment, your glyphosate probably won't, but if there is an accident on site, there's a spillage, or a person drinks the liquid or gets the liquid all over them, etc., etc., what you should be able to do, and what any member of staff should be able to do, is reach for that COSHH data sheet. So the relevance of that is that when the paramedic or a medical person comes to look at the person who has been injured, they understand what's in that chemical. They understand how to treat that person of just doing first aid. So if I give you a perfect example, for most people, common feature is if you swallow something that you don't like, etc., etc., it's either to drink more water or to try to vomit, etc. What you have to look at, in certain cases, it tells you not to induce vomiting. In other cases, it would tell you not to drink any water. So you need to understand, and what you need to be able to understand is making sure that the staff understand what to do in the course of an accident. The first thing they should reach for is a COSHH data sheet. When the paramedics turn up, they should be able to give it to the paramedic and say, this is what they've drank, this is what they've spilt on their body, etc., etc., and hopefully they should be able to deal with it. So my first question to you guys out there, in terms of the COSHH data sheets, do you believe within your organization that your COSHH data sheets are relevant and up to date? Because what you find in a lot of organizations, sometimes you even have COSHH data sheets that are totally out of date. They're not even relevant to the chemicals you got on site. So how do you manage, and just want one or two people to give me some feedback, how do you manage this process in terms of your COSHH data and your RAMs?
If anybody would like to share their experience, you can just, maybe say that you would like to in the chat, and I can get you all on stage, please.
Nobody?
Just what I said. I think a couple of people are typing in, so okay.
Okay.
Michael Williamson is willing to speak. Let me just get him on stage.
Okay, cool.
Michael, I've invited you on stage if you could accept. You should be there.
You can hear me now?
Yes. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Shati, and hi, Tommy.
Hi, Michael.
How are things? I just want to mention about this issue about COSHH assessments and this. We're having awful problems with this because we're finding that we've tested a lot of our staff, and even the supervisory staff that's been hired here. I work in Saudi Arabia, as I mentioned previously. They come with such a poor level of English understanding that they don't understand the risks. They don't understand what you're trying to teach them, and we're having an awful problem with this issue. I mean, I sit with them every day and said, you should not pick a bottle or a can off the shelf if you don't know what's inside it and you don't know what to do if anything happens. And you should always make sure you have the proper PPE. But it is really a hard task here, because what companies are doing, they're actually hiring for the lowest possible wages, and the people don't seem to understand the seriousness of some of these chemicals.
Okay, Michael, can I just ask you a couple of questions?
Yes.
And maybe able to get a steer. So it may be hard for you to believe, or you do believe. I mean, we have the same situation here. We have a very multicultural environment. We have lots of people working within the clean industry from different countries. Okay, so we have the similar problem here. But my question to you is, apart from verbal instructions, what other instructions that you use to actually get this message across to the staff?
We have all the safety data sheets for everything, and it's clearly labeled, and basically we have what's equivalent of a toolbox talk every day about the seriousness of these issues.
Okay.
But what I'm thinking to have done is to have them translated, as some of the companies have, translate them into the language of the main people, because it's all, as you mentioned, it's all right talking to people, but if you don't have anything written that they can refer to, it tends to go in one ear and out the other ear.
Okay.
So we're looking to translate the data sheets into a language it's common among most of the people.
Okay, so I think the one thing that I would say to you, I think that that's going to be quite a costly exercise for you to do. If you look at some of the cost data sheets, you will see that some of the, I mean, I don't mean this in a derogatory manner, but even I struggle to read some of the words on a data sheet in terms of chemical compounds, etc., etc. Okay, and again, you've got to realise in certain cases this will not translate. You know, it won't translate into a different language the way that it's written. So the one thing that I would advise you, to look at before you put your money into doing that is to look at how you can get that information across visually. So, you know, have you thought of having your method statement in written format with pictures against it?
Well, most of the method statements that we have do already have the pictures, and there's not really any cost factor because we have our own training centre here.
Okay.
So as I understood from a session with BICS a couple of months ago, they told us that the most important thing is sections, I think, 2, 4, 8, and 10. So I emphasize these as the principal sections because you're right, there's many people here that do not understand, and even though they're in sections, if you're going to read them before you operate it, it's a time-consuming job, and a lot of people would even well-educated do not really understand what is in there. Apart from your health and safety people, they tend to understand.
Yeah.
But the rest don't.
Okay. So
you pick up the main sections. Was what I'm saying.
I think the key sections to a data sheet, that's fine. The key sections are not the problem. I think that it's like anything else. It's about getting that message across. As I said, I think that in my personal point of view, and in the past where I've seen, it doesn't always work to have something translated to a different language, because what you have to appreciate and understand is that some of the staff that you're talking to, their level of education is even poor within their own mother tongue. So to translate it into something that they're not going to be able to read anyway, whether it be Hindi or Gujarati or whether it be Arabic, and if they struggle with their education to start with, then that's not going to actually sort of produce the results you want. So
sorry, Tommy, what I mean was we're going to translate it for the supervisors so they can not for the cleaners themselves, no.
Right.
Because you're right what you're saying, yes.
Right, okay. So the supervisor will disseminate the information to the operatives, correct?
Yes.
Right, okay. No, I understand now. Sorry, you're making sense. So yeah. But as I said, in my recommendation would be where you can use visuals, then use visuals. I think that serves much more purpose than sometimes just having loads of text, because people will switch off. As I said, their educational level may not take them down to that level where they can actually continually read what you've written, regardless of what language you put it in. So if you're going to do that, then that's fine. But as I said, if you could try to get something visual, then I think that's the best way. Okay, Michael?
Thank you, Tommy. Thank you.
Can I take one more, please, from the floor?
Thank you, Michael. Okay. Anybody else would like to share their experience? Denise, yes. Tommy, I'll get Denise on.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, Denise. I've sent you the invitation.
Hello, everyone. I'm not sure if you can hear me.
I can hear you, Denise.
We can hear you. Denise?
I have a problem hearing you, but I'm not sure if you can hear me.
We can hear you clearly. Hello? Denise, we can hear you clearly. I hope you want me to take you off and get you back on?
I think let's do that, Shanti.
Yeah, I'll do that.
If you roll the next slide for me, and I'll go through that I'll go through that while you getting
the next slide.
Yes, please.
Okay. The training one?
No, the principles of risk assessment.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So, right. So I sort of touched on it, but not in the terms that it's been shown here. So what we're going to do is just run through these principles of running a risk assessment, how to run a risk analysis. Okay. So what you need to do is obviously, and I've said this previously, but I'm just going to sort of put it in terms that laid out in this diagram, is you need to just identify the risks. Okay. Look around you, look around the workplace, see what can cause harm to people. What can you do about it? You know, how will people be affected by something being in the wrong place, or by not being trained, or using the wrong equipment? You know, what chemicals and substances do you use? Can you make it easier for the staff to use them? Can you use a tablet instead of using a liquid? Can you use a liquid instead of a powder? To have a look and see what you can do to make sure that you try to reduce that particular risk and identify that particular hazard. Is a general state of the premises, even if we take, for instance, cleaners cupboards or housekeeping cupboards, you know, are they in good repair? Is the floor sound? Is there proper shelving? Is there lockable cupboards for hazardous chemicals? Are hazardous chemicals stored in the right place? Should they be outside? Should they be inside? These are the sort of things you need. Who's responsible for disseminating hazardous chemicals, hazardous material? The next thing is to assess the risk. So once you've identified the hazard, you need to decide, you know, who could be harmed by this. So in most cases, what we got is the operative and our clients, whether they be somebody in a shopping mall, in a hospital, somebody who works in an office, they can all be affected by our actions, whether, you know, right actions or wrong actions. So we need to decide who could be harmed. You know, what are the measures that we're using at the moment to control that particular risk? Are there risk assessments? Is there training available to the staff? Can they use something else rather than, you know, can they use a flat mop rather than using a Kentucky mop or a dolly mop? They're the sort of scenarios we need to look at, and they're quite simple things in terms of to change and to reduce the potential risk. How do you control that risk? So you're looking at what you're already doing. You know, a lot of you guys out there, you're working with foreign labor, has been said, like Michael's just expressed just now. You're working with foreign labor. You're working with some people that have never cleaned never cleaned in a structured manner until they turned up in your country. You know, you need to look at how do you control their actions? You know, are their actions right? Are their actions wrong? Are they going to be doing the wrong thing? Are they going to try and cut corners? You know, are they under pressure? And even when we're looking at controlling risk, we're looking at time factors. You know, we are in a world where people want things done quickly and they want them done cheap. But with that comes a risk. If you cut corners, then you increase the potential risk of an accident. Can you redesign the way that job is done? Is there a different method that you can use? You know, rather than using, as I said, rather than using a dolly mop, can you use a flat mop? Can you use a microfiber mop? Yeah. They're the sort of things that you need to look at. What about cloths, for instance? Now, in terms of where we are today with COVID, we're looking at what is the risk there? How do you control that particular risk? How do you make sure that the staff clean in a manner that you want them to clean and they're safe doing it? They're not using the same cloth on 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different surfaces. Are they using the chemicals in the right manner? Now, one of the things that we've lost during this past year is the ability to know whether we're over disinfecting. Now, to some of you that might sound strange, but prior to COVID, one of the problems that we had is that bacteria or spores, they get used to a particular chemical if it's used day in, day out. Hence, that's why we prescribe that you have a 2-stage clean, or in some cases 3 stages. But 2-stage clean will be a damp wipe with a neutral detergent, and then you then put in your disinfectant afterwards. And that was always the way prior to COVID, but it's become hopefully the norm now. So what you need to do is look at that. Are your staff delivering that in the right manner to make sure that the risk of somebody getting COVID or picking up a virus from a surface, etc., etc. So you need to put controls in to, relevant controls. Look at your supervisory staff. Are they able to sort of deliver what you want? Are they able to understand what the risks are? Are they able to put measures in to make sure that the staff work in the appropriate manner? Then what you then should do is record your findings. So recording in terms of what we were talking about just now, recording would be in your method statement. If your method and the risk is high and you've changed the method because of a particular situation, then you change your method statement accordingly. And you make your method statement relevant to what the task is and tighten it up as much as you can. Keep records of, keep a record of what's going on. In the UK, and I'm not sure in the region that you're in the UK, you have to, if you employ more than 5 people, you must record significant findings. So a significant finding will be the potential hazard, who might be harmed by that particular task, what do you do to control the particular risk. So these are things that we had to look at constantly. Now, I don't know, I've not investigated, I don't know what the accident rate is within the cleaning industry within the UK. And I also don't know what the death rate is in terms of how things work. One of the most stricter areas within the UK in terms of level of risk and risk management is window cleaning, especially external window cleaning at high levels. And I suspect it's the same in your country. So if you think about somebody cleaning a window on a high-rise building, you can't take a risk assessment from one high-rise building and then throw it into another one, say that's a generic one, that's okay. No, you have to do a risk assessment that is specific to that building, specific to the activities that take place in that building. Then we talk about monitor and review. So what we're talking about monitor review, we're looking at, once you've done that, don't sit back on what you've got. You look at it on a periodic basis, you review what you've got. Is it working? Are things working okay? Are the staff putting the warning signs in the right place? Are the staff diluting the chemicals correctly? Are the staff putting the correct amount of water on the floor when they're mopping? Is the floor left as dry as possible when they finish mopping? When the staff use a rotary machine, are they using the right pad? Are they using it correctly? Do they know how to clean it? Do they know how to check it? So there's certain things that you should be doing and monitoring all the time. And so, there are the 5 pillars in terms of risk assessments, in terms of the way that we manage, and that's exactly the same as what we do for our COSHH and our COSHH assessment. So let me touch on the COSHH assessment before I go any further. So a COSHH assessment is basically what you should be doing to assess the risk in using a particular chemical. So from the COSHH data sheet and from your analysis of the way people use things, you should be able to write a COSHH assessment based on that particular chemical. Now, Michael said to me about the pillars that we're looking for in terms of the COSHH assessment. See, if we go to number 8, for instance, which is PPE, now what we find is, especially in today's world, our staff have to wear face masks, our staff have to wear the relevant gloves, and in certain cases they have to wear relevant shoes or boots or coveralls, etc., etc. Now, if we look at the chemical and we look at the MSDS on the chemical, it may say, and it has said in certain cases, that gloves are not necessary or a face mask is not necessary. However, it's up to you as a company what you do. What you should be doing is enhancing an MSDS sheet, not downgrading it. So if it says on the MSDS sheet that the staff must wear gloves, you cannot say, legally, you should not say on your COSHH assessment, you don't have to wear gloves. Always enhance, but enhance for the better. Don't enhance because it looks good. So just another example, if the chemical, for instance, says that you don't need to wear gloves, but you want all your staff to wear gloves, then you would write it into your COSHH assessment. So again, what I would say to you, there's no point having a COSHH assessment, COSHH data, and it sits in the folder and it looks nice and the client's glad that you've got one and ISO's glad that you've got a folder full of documents. But if you don't sort of train it into the staff in terms of getting them to understand about wearing their PPE, especially in today's environment, then you're putting yourself in trouble, then the risk is increased. Okay, next slide please, Shanti. Okay, so I touched on the gain and I'll go over it. So in terms of what are the RAMs, so RAMs is a risk assessment method statement. So the RA is the risk management and the MS is the actual method statement. Again, just to reiterate, they are important in the scheme of things, in the whole scheme of running your company. And going back to what we said last week about corporate governance, about having policies, you know, you'd all have a health and safety policy. Should all have a health and safety policy within your organization. You all should be insured in terms of accidents and risk and employee liability. These are the sort of things that they would ask for. They would ask for your risk assessments. They would ask for your method statements, making sure they're up to date. Yes, if you review them once a year, that's fine, better than nothing. But make sure you review them on a regular basis. And if you see something's not working, change it. What you don't have to do, and I think people get confused, is that if you've got, for instance, a risk assessment and you want to make a change to it, you don't necessarily have to change the whole risk assessment. What you can do is just put an addendum in there, just put a note in there, put something to add with it, the changes that you've made and why you've made them, until you can actually do a formal change. So, you know, you don't always have to make it that formal and that rigid to begin with, but you should document it in some shape or form. So the requirement size that you have them, they're relevant, they're up to date, and they're fit for purpose. They should work in the situation that you put them in. So if you're working in a hospital, don't assume that you could use the same risk assessment if you're working in an office, vice versa. Okay, and then again, the last bullet point is how often should they be reviewed? Well, generally people say once a year. That's fine. If you do them once every 6 months, that's also fine. It'd be ridiculous to do them every week unless you've got a really, really high risk activity. If you have, then it should be done on an even more regular basis than that, even once a week, twice a week, if it's a really, really high risk activity that they're working on. Okay, so Shanti, do we have any other questions for me?
Not right now. Denise had wanted to share what they do, you know, in terms of compliance and hazards, but it's a little difficult because she's not able to hear what we're saying.
Right, okay.
I asked her to type it in, but she hasn't yet. So I think we can continue for now. No questions as such. People, if you guys, if you want to send across any questions, any queries, please let us know.
Okay.
Yeah, Tommy, I think we can continue.
Yep, so we've got a couple more minutes to go. So what I'm going to do, Shanti, I'm going to hold up a sheet here. It's in black and white, so I apologise, that was my fault. So those of you can see, I'm not sure it looks backwards on your screen. So that is an example of a COSHH assessment sheet. Okay, so what we've got here, if I can see, so what we've got here is, in this section here, is the name of the chemical. Okay, the location where it will be used will be here. Then in this section here, it describes the activity of work. So what work are we going to use for that particular chemical? Is it a hard surface cleaner? Is it going to be for the floor? So if we turn in what we're doing now, if we look at the COVID situation that we've got now, is it going to be used to sanitize, to disinfect the surface? Have we got the right chemicals for that? Are you using a bactericide or viricide? You know, they're the sort of things you need to be looking at. You've got the location, the exact location. So you might have the client name at the top, but you might have a different location within that particular site. Who's at risk on that, using that particular chemical? Is it the employees? Is it other contractors? Is it the general public? So you need to be able to identify that. The name of the substance involved. So if we go back to the COSHH data sheet, you'll pick that up from section 1. Section 1 will tell you the name of the chemical. Okay, it will also tell you the person who's supplying it in that respect. So in this section here, that's where you record the potential hazards in terms of the hazard signs. Okay. So currently there are 9 that we use in terms of classification. And again, you'll get that information from the COSHH data sheet. And most good COSHH data sheets now will have the diagram on the bottle. So what we suffered with here a few years ago was that we had some, I wouldn't say they were unscrupulous, but we had some manufacturers that were still selling chemicals that they had on their shelves that didn't have the sign on them. And that sort of, you know, that led to some problems in certain areas. So what you got, the next one here, if you can see, I hope you can, is the hazard type. What type of hazard is it? Is it gas? Is it vapor? Is it powder? Is it dust? Yeah. Okay, and then the next section here, section 7, will be the risk of exposure. So the route of exposure. So would it be through inhalation? Would it be contact with the skin? Would it be contact with the eyes? Would it be something they swallow? So the reason why I'm going to stress on this one is because it's very important in terms of the chemicals that you use. Some people, they may or may not know it, are allergic to certain things. Okay, so they may be allergic to powdered materials, dust, or the compound that it's made of. Some people will have occupational dermatitis, which is not always generally seen at first hand. So the problem with occupational dermatitis is it's something that can grow after years and years and years, and you realize that your hands change, you're getting skin blisters, or your skin is flaking, or the oils in your skin is drying out, which is a common problem where people are using chemicals in the wrong way. They're either putting their hands straight into a chemical with no gloves. They're either putting their hands into a chemical with hot water, which dries the oils of your skin. And after years and years of doing that, then you have skin problems, which is called occupational dermatitis. So the route of exposure you need to look at. How do you measure that? What do you do about that? What measures will you put in to sort of alleviate that? Now, as I said to you, on some MSDS sheets, you will find that it doesn't ask you that you don't have to wear gloves. But as an organization, as a company, you make a conscious effort to say to all your staff, we want you to wear gloves. Okay? And that reduces the risk of contact or occupational dermatitis in terms of the skin. So once you've done all that and you've got pulled that up, what you then need to do, like on this other page, which you will see here, is what are your control measures? What do you do to control that risk? So do you control that risk by training? Do you control that risk by ventilation? Do you control that risk by better supervision? Or the extreme, do you control that risk or by actually sort of moving that chemical aside and getting something else in? There's different things that you need to look at and different ways you need to treat it. So going down now, we've got here, again, very visual. And that goes back to what I said about Michael. If you can make things visual, it makes life a lot easier. If you can see here, you've got visual signs of what you should be wearing. So in this particular case, we've got here dust masks, we've got visors, which again is very poignant today, gloves, footwear, respirators, goggles, overalls, and if there's an other scenario you need to use. So you need to be able to identify that. Again, because we've got it in pictogram here, there should be no mistake about what you did. They don't have to read it. providing they can actually identify what the things are and you've taught them how to read the pictures. Okay, so what I need to ask any of you is, do you have a similar scenario in terms of your COSHH assessment? Do you assess your chemicals, and how do you manage that situation?
Anybody would like to talk about the COSHH assessment? Shafiq, so I'll get you on board, Shafiq, right, on stage. Shafiq has also spoken about a couple of things, as well as Denise. So once you address this with Shafiq, Tommy, we can go back to what Denise and Shafiq.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Waiting for you, Shafiq.
He's disappeared on us.
He may have a firewall.
Ah, right, okay.
That has happened a couple of times.
Okay.
I've tried to send you the invite again, Shafiq. No, it's not going through.
Okay, can you pull up Denise? Can you get her on?
Yeah.
Once I've spoken to Denise, we'll have a comfort break.
Yeah. Denise, again, I don't know if she would be able to. Let me try. Otherwise, I'm going to just read out what she has said.
Okay, cool.
Okay. Denise, I've sent you an invitation. Maybe you can try another time, last time. One last time. No. I don't know. There's some sort of issue, I think.
No? Does anybody else have a question before we have a recess?
Let me just read out what they've said.
Sure.
Okay, there are a couple of things.
Sure.
So what Denise has mentioned with regard to your previous, question was, she said that we have health and safety committee meetings that are held on a monthly basis and sometimes weekly, especially if we have new policies and procedures, until everyone is familiar with them. In this meeting, we talk about the incidents for the previous month and what actions have been put in place to prevent it in the future.
Mm-hmm.
This allows us to focus or spot in reoccurring or most common incidents in order to team up and put an end to it.
Yeah.
Part of the committee's job is to perform audits as well, which includes MCA's update for each department and also spot check and report the inventory for the first aid boxes to ensure that we have an incident reported to every missing first aid tool or item from the box.
Okay.
This is what she said.
Okay, and that really is what she's actually demonstrated. There is the principles that I put up on the screen earlier on in terms of the 5 principles. So what they do is they're going to the last 2 principles, which is they record what the situation is, and then what they then do is monitor and review what can be done to reduce and alleviate that risk. As I said, the thing that we all have to understand is that, within our scenario, there's no such thing as there's no risk or low risk. Everything has a risk to it, and we're dealing with humans. We're dealing with humans who will follow our rules, or some of them will try and cut corners because it's quicker and it's better, etc., etc. So everything has a risk. So in terms of what Denise says, and I couldn't criticize what she says in terms of having regular team meetings and everybody having an input and looking at the way that you do things. I think that's excellent. Okay,
great. So Shafiq, who we were also trying to get on, but I don't know what the issue is, says that he with Denise. They also have safety action groups, which include operators, managers, and senior management.
Okay.
And he also has a question. He says that the COSHH awareness symbols are already in the MSDS. Does that really require printing lots of papers, which is against the environmental management system processes? Is there any advancement required in combining risk assessments and COSHH assessments as one sheet or document so that it will be much easier for the team? What he has experienced over the years is that MSDS has all these control measures or risks highlighted, and most of the standard chemicals come with COSHH labels.
Okay. So yes, I perfectly understand that, and I understand in terms of paper management, etc., etc. But what we have to try to take into account is that the COSHH assessment is more about the company. The MSDS sheet is really about the chemical and the suppliers. All, you know, the information that's on it is all relevant without a doubt, but the COSHH assessment is what's relevant. So basically what you're doing is you can't leave anything to chance. If you have an MSDS sheet that doesn't measure the risk, it doesn't tell you what the potential risks are, it generally doesn't tell it doesn't tell the staff how to use it. It tells them, may tell them on a chemical bottle how to use it, but it doesn't always tell them how to use a particular chemical. A common feature, for instance, one of the things that I found in all my years of teaching and running skills programs is, should we use hot water or cold water? Now, quite commonly, a lot of people think, oh yeah, we've got a hard surface cleaner, we use hot water because it will kill germs. Well, actually, unless it says so on the bottle, everything should be used as cold, because you start using it as hot water. The thing is, the thing is that if you've got hot water in a bucket, how long does it stay hot for? If you've got to mop, 10,000 square feet of floor, then how many changes of water you're going to have in order to keep it hot and keep that active? So, that's just a small feature. So if you've got a COSHH assessment, and one of the things that you say in your COSHH assessment is use cold water, then you've done your job. If you use hot water, especially if you're using things like chlorine and bleach, then that has a detrimental effect on the person's eyes, has a detrimental effect on their breathing system, because they're breathing in vapors from the bleach, and because of the hot water, it's carrying them vapors through their body. So although I understand about the paper management and that kind of scenario, you can put the two together, but you should have, it's advisable, sorry, rather than saying should, it's advisable to have a separate COSHH assessment, which has been carried out by the company, to be able to show, even down to the point on your COSHH assessment, you can put the dilution rates. You can tell the staff, so they don't have to keep reading the bottle, what to put in their dilution rate. So I agree to some point, but what I can't agree with in essence is really using the MSDS as the definitive. That shouldn't be the way. You should have a COSHH assessment.
Okay. Somebody asked earlier on, how do we write a risk assessment?
How do you write one? Okay. The first principle in writing a risk assessment is really to write the method statement first. Okay. You write your method statement in whatever manner, in chronological order, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, do X, do Y, do this, don't do this. And then what you then do is carry out that task against your method statement. Once you've carried out once you've carried that out, what you'll be able to see is where the pitfalls are in your method statement, and you tighten it up. Once you've done that, you then can do your risk assessment against that method statement. So you're basically saying to the staff, if you do it in this manner, your risk will be very low, because this is how we want you to do it. And hence, that's why I said a generic risk assessment, regardless if it's about mopping a floor, etc., is not always the way to go. So for me, the first thing to do is write your method statement. And some years ago, considerable amount of years ago, my first method statement had nothing to do with cleaning whatsoever. In order to learn how to write a method statement, what we were asked to do was to write a method statement for making a cup of tea. Now, if you had to do that without actually the implements to do that tea, you would find it's very, very difficult, because you miss out key points. We were missing out points that we'd filled the kettle with water, but we forgot to turn the kettle on to boil the water. Simple things of that nature. And I know it sounds very simple, but that's a starting point in order to understand how should you put together a method statement. And the only way to put it together is to be able to write it and do the task yourself. Once you've done that, you can then transfer that information to a risk assessment. So with that method statement, you need to evaluate the risk. Is it going to be high? It's all if you're in some dangerous industries like duct cleaning, pipe cleaning, stuff of that nature, then the level of risk is always going to be high, even with a risk assessment, but it still has to be managed in some shape or form. Okay, so my advice to you, first of all, is to learn and understand how to put together a method statement. Once you've done that and you've tested it, then you'll be able to measure your risk against that method statement. And if you're happy that you've done that, then what you then do again is have your colored box system. So what you would say is, if you're if I simplify it, if you're mopping a floor, for instance, what are the potential risks of somebody mopping a floor, not doing it correctly? They leave too much water on the floor, they make the floor slippery, or they leave the bucket and the mop unattended, they're using the wrong mop, they're using the wrong bucket, they're using the wrong color. These are all the things that need to be done in the method statement. If you put that in the method statement, that reduces the potential risk that you're going to have to do when you do your risk assessment. So once you've done that, you would have your risk ratings against the particular task, and then you'll be able to measure, is it a high level, is it a medium level, is it a low level risk? And that's about the best way I can explain it at the moment in such a short space of time.
Thanks, Tommy. We have a couple more questions.
Sure.
So Ravi Gupta says that RAMS and JHA, or job hazard analysis, are terms that we are using in a national manual for asset and FM in Saudi Arabia. Is there any difference between these terminologies?
Oh, I've never used the term. Was it job hazard analysis?
Yes.
What Ravi would like to explain to me is the content of one of them, because I don't know. It may be, we may be talking about the same thing. We may be talking about a method statement. I don't know. I've never come across that particular term.
Yeah, Ravi, if you can explain a little further, maybe it would help Tommy answer your question. We also have a question from Ala Bashir, who says, how often does the company refresh its assessment of the top risks?
If you've got a very, very high risk activity, then it should be assessed on a regular basis. If you're running something like a window cleaning company and your guys are working at high level, you're running a rope descent, etc., yes, you put your risk assessment in. Your window cleaning operatives, they should be evaluating their own risk of what they're doing, because they don't want to put their lives at risk. So I would probably say, in a situation like that, you know, the life of, if you've got a clean of a building, it's about a week, then that should be okay. But what you should be instilling in the staff is that they manage their own risk in terms of following the methods that you've asked them to do, checking their equipment, checking their checking their ropes, checking their chair, checking their mops, their squeegees and stuff of that nature. Same thing in terms of DOC when you're doing daily office cleaning, for instance. It's probably not necessary unless there's a big change in the environment to actually evaluate that risk assessment on a weekly or monthly basis. Generally, the general rule of thumb is what we say is 12 months. But you should, if you've got it in for 12 months, that's fine. But if there's any significant change within that building environment, within the cleaning environment, then you should then look at your risk assessment and do a re-evaluation.
Any other questions? I can see a couple of people typing in, but maybe
Sure.
we can answer those questions after the break, Tommy?
Sure, no problem.
Yeah?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, so guys, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back in exactly 10 minutes. If you all have any questions, please feel free to chat or put them in the question tab.
Shanti, if they say, if we make it easy, because it's in between the hour now. So if we make it easy and say 1:15.
Okay.
Yeah, just say 1:15 and then we'll start from there.
Okay, so we'll, but your 1:15 will be a different time for them as well. So
yeah, no, but just 1/4 the hour. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Okay, then. No problem.
So we're on break, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, Tommy. Welcome back.
Okay, back.
Yes.
Did you get the documents?
Yes, I did.
And I sent you a third one, the matrix.
Okay. Just hold on. Let me just check that. Okay. So shall we start with
Pardon?
shall we start with the COSHH assessment?
Yeah, cool. Yep.
I'll get that put up on the screen and we can explain that to you.
Yep, no problem. Hi all, welcome back. So by request and partly my fault, you now should have a sample of the COSHH assessment sheet on the screen, and I can go through it and say if there's any questions aligned to it. Again, what I would say to you, and I would impress on you, this is not the definitive. You can design your own. You can find there's lots of samples on the internet that you could use in terms of this particular scenario. I found this one particularly easy to use, and it was visual, and it made sense to most of the people. And I used this one most commonly for when I was training, so it was always something that was there for the candidates to look at and to use and to touch and to just generally absorb what's on it. And commonly, most of these scenario things that's on it are common to everybody. So I'll go back and we can do it. So what we've got, so in this particular scenario here, in this particular box here, what you should have is a COSHH assessment number. So you have a number against a particular chemical you're going to assess, etc. Then again here we've got the name of the chemical, and all these items here, these items here can be copied from the actual MSDS sheet. Then you've got the actual building name of where it's relevant for, and then you've got a description of the work activity. So the work activity could be as simple as the chemicals used for hard surface cleaning, or it's used for mopping floors, or it's used for disinfecting, it's used for sanitizing, etc., etc., etc. Then what you have is the location where the process is being carried out. So as I say, this could be the main building, but there could be sub buildings. So this could be, building A, level 5, or what the case may be. So there's certain things, certain areas. Again, you've got to be careful. So for instance, if you're using, for instance, a floor polish on a vinyl floor, now you've got the name of the building here, but it may not be relevant for all parts of that particular building. It may only be relevant for 1 or 2 floors or 1 or 2 areas. So if you want to define the area, then that's fine. Then in this section here, as I said, you've got who's going to be affected by this particular potential risk. So you've got employees, so fellow employees, or in my case, it was trainees, whether it be contractors or public or students, in my case again, because it was sometimes my students. Then again, number 4 here, the name of the substance involved in the process and its manufacturer. So, so your supplier may not be the manufacturer. So you need to, work out who it is, whether it be, I don't know, Jangro or Jays or somebody of that nature. So the key bits here, when we get down, well, it's all key, but the bits we get down here in section 5 is a classification. So what you'll find on your chemical bottle is, should find is a classification. And some chemicals are not classified for some particular reason, but what you need to look at is the 9 classifications here and tick the one that is relevant for that particular chemical. Okay. Then, as I said, point 6, you've got the hazard type. So is it a gas? Will it be affected by vapor, mist? Are there fumes, dust, liquid, or is it a solid? So again, when you get to this particular scenario here, you may use that. And if you're finding you've got a problem with that particular chemical because it produces lots of dust, and I'll give you an example. There was, and I've not heard of the case lately, there was a situation here in the UK where some operatives that work in the hospital via their union were taking the hospital trust to court because some of them have been affected by using chlorine tablets. So what most of you will find, or you should find, if you have a canister of chlorine tablets, when you open up that canister, what you should have is a barrier between you and opening it up. So commonly what you would find is sometimes there's a piece of sponge that sits inside. So basically what happens is when you open up the canister and the sponge is there, you don't get a rush of dust, which you can't always see from inside that canister. What was happening is that the canisters are being delivered, but there was no barrier. So constantly the staff were opening it up totally indiscriminately, as you do, open it up. If they were in a slightly drafty environment, so the dust was getting into the air, they were breathing the dust in, and as the years gone by, they were getting affected by the dust which came from the chlorine tablets. So what the authority had to make, apart from deciding how they're going to defend themselves in court, they had to then decide, well, what have we done wrong? So is it better to use a liquid in this particular case, or is it still okay to carry on with this particular chemical, but then ask the manufacturers to provide the dust shield in between? So there's lots of things that you need to look at in terms of that, whether it's right or wrong. Again, as I said, and this is not picking on anyone in particular, 9 times out of 10, the people that will know what's best are the operational people, right? The health and safety guys, they don't have to use the chemicals. They don't always understand what it's like to have to use a particular chemical. They don't understand the smell that comes from that chemical, the vapor. They don't understand the consequence sometimes in terms of, if you use hot water, what are the consequences of breathing in the fumes from that particular chemical? So, so it is a good idea in cases to get your operational people involved in this particular process, because they will be the ones to tell you best in terms of whether it affects them, whether it don't affect them. And remember, it all affects people in different ways. Again, the routes of exposure. So we've got here, so inhalation via the skin, via eyes and ingestion, and then there's other means. So again, you just need to identify that. What are the workplace exposure limits? So, i.e., in this particular case, how long can you use that chemical for before you need to take a break, before you need to go out and get some air, etc., etc.? Can you use it continuously? If you're using chlorine, for instance, can be quite hazardous if you're in a confined space and using it for a prolonged time. So, what are the limits? Is it 1 hour, 2 hours in that particular case? In some cases, that's the way you measure it. Same thing if you've got, so if you've got dry chemicals, it's all, it's a problem. If you've got a liquid, again, it can be a problem, but again, you need to check. A lot of chemicals now don't have perfumes, but it's a personal choice. What we need to look at, especially in this day and age, and I like your opinion when I've finished this particular section, is the COVID situation. The chemicals that have been introduced now for you guys to use when you're doing your cleaning for, disinfecting for COVID. What is your COSHH assessment and your risk assessment for misting, for fogging, etc., etc.? These are all the things you need to look at. So state the risk, number 9, state the risk and the health from identifying that particular hazard. So what would be the risk? What is the potential risk to somebody constantly breathing in dry dust fumes from a chlorine bottle? What is the risk of somebody using bleach continuously? Even neutral detergent, very liquid, what is the risk of them using that constantly, day in, day out, with no gloves? There's sort of scenarios you need to look at. So
Tommy,
yeah.
Can I interrupt you here?
Yeah.
A couple of people are unable to hear you. So can you give us a second to figure out what the issue might be?
Where are we talking about? In what particular situation?
No. They cannot hear you right now. They cannot hear the audio.
Oh, can't they? Oh.
Yeah. So I've got a couple of messages right now.
Okay.
Can you talk again? They're saying that they can hear now. So.
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Can they hear me now?
Can you all hear now? Shafiq, Umair, Robson, Dilip, can you all hear? Please let me know right away before we continue. Dilip, Robson. Okay, can hear Shanti, can't hear Tommy. Tommy, can you go off stage and come back?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you want me to do? Log in again?
I'll just get you off stage. You'll get an option of join stage again. You can just
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay, can they hear me now?
Yes. Guys, can you all hear? Let us know within a couple of seconds, please. Yes, all good now. You can continue, Tommy.
Yeah, okay. Could you just ask them quickly, where did they lose me? In terms of this particular sheet?
Yeah, in this sheet, where did you lose, Tommy? Which point did you all hear last? Whoever gives me the first answer, we're going to continue from there, okay? Classification.
Classification. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so as I said here, classification. So on the chemical bottles that you normally should use, there'd be a classification regardless of how hazardous the chemical is. So what you need to do when you're doing your COSHH assessment is to mimic that classification on your COSHH assessment sheet. So if, for instance, the chemical is a hazard to the environment, then what you do is you'll tick. If it's a health hazard, then you'll tick. Okay. Then you come down, you've got your hazard types here. So in your hazard types here, you've got whether it's a gas, whether it's vapor, whether it's mist, whether it's fume, dust, liquid or solid. So the example I gave was, for instance, if you're using something like chlorine tablets, then although it's a solid, there are dust particles that will come from that particular chemical. So you need to be careful of that particular scenario. Okay. In this section here, section 7, then what you've got here is the routes of exposure. So if the person, the potential routes of exposure can be, in certain cases, inhalation. So inhalation will be, and I would describe that as, again, I'll go back to if you're using hot water instead of cold water. So hot water will produce steam vapor, which then you breathe in, and that can cause you a problem with certain chemicals. Okay, then you've got your skin, which again, if you're not wearing gloves, etc., your eyes, if you're not wearing protective goggles or protective eye shields, and ingestion, if somebody happens to sort of, take it in by mouth, etc., what will happen? So then you've got here your workplace level exposure. So what you're saying that in this particular section is how long should somebody use that chemical for before their exposure to it becomes a hazard. So if you decide, for instance, that you only want them to use it in a certain situation, and generally it comes down to working in a confined space, working in extreme temperatures, and what you'll say is, look, we would only want you to be in there for 1 hour out of every 2, or you need to take a break after every 15. So you just need to state your case in here. So in terms of this particular bit, state the risks to the health. You identify the hazard. So what would a hazard be? So the potential hazards will be that the staff have not been trained properly, so hence they don't use the chemical properly. You haven't got a risk assessment. You haven't got a method statement. Well, you haven't got a method statement, sorry, related to this particular chemical. You haven't given them the right PPE to wear. So again, in this particular time that we're in terms of COVID, etc., there's a specification in terms of what is acceptable, in terms of what the right face mask to wear, what the correct eye shields to wear, what are the correct gloves to wear in particular situations. So all these things will be identified here as a potential hazard. What could that be? So it could be the environment. As I said to you, it could be the environment where the environment is too hot and the chemical reacts and you're getting vapors from the chemical because it's too hot and it's a humid atmosphere, etc. It may be an enclosed environment, so there's not a lot of space, there's not a lot of fresh air, there's not a lot of cross air between the window and the door, etc. So there's that kind of scenario you need to look into. And as I said, before, in this particular case, and you can see it's very defined. When you get down to maybe sort of 0.8, you can sort of probably make the rest of it generic, apart from obviously the name and the location. But when you get down to 0.8 and 0.9, you need to know what the site is like. What conditions are the staff working in that particular site to be able to evaluate what the levels of exposure are going to be, what are the potential risks that's going to be for using that particular chemical. So if you go to the next page, Shanti, please. So this is where I think I left you briefly. So what are the levels? What are the control measures? So if you see in the top box, it tells you, for example, right, so the control measures will be extraction. So you could put in air filters and extraction filters, proper ventilation. Training is always there. Training should be number one. If you don't train them properly, then you're gonna inflate the risk of them sort of damaging themselves, damaging your client's property, and injuring the public. Supervision. So you've got a good supervisor. That supervisor should be able to, or hopefully will be able to, identify if somebody is doing something wrong. Is there a training need for that particular person, why they're doing it wrong? Going back to what Michael was saying in terms of the language barrier, what you tend to find, and it's no different to where you're working, it's no different here. What you tend to find is that if the supervisor is of a particular nationality, what you will find is generally that a lot of staff below them speak the same language. So, i.e., if they're Spanish, you may find people who are Hispanic who speak either Brazilian Spanish or Colombian or of that nature. So you find that generally they all come from the same region and they can understand each other. And it's a good thing for that to happen, because as an organization you can use them to get the message across to the staff, because they all use the same mother tongue, they understand each other, and that's fine. So it says, including special measures for vulnerable groups. So what are vulnerable groups? So people who are allergic to particular chemicals, people who have breathing problems, people who have problems with their eyes. Because remember, if you're getting vapors that are going into someone's eyes, that could create a problem. If you've got somebody who's got a particular disability, and last but not least in this particular case, if the person is pregnant. So I can't speak outside of this particular country, but for someone in the UK, as soon as a person tells their employer that they're pregnant, then a risk assessment should be carried out for that employee for various tasks of what they're doing. Not only the use of chemicals, but actually the tasks that they're actually conducting, they're carrying out. For those of you that are in the know, we would know that some ladies suffer with difficult pregnancies, and they had to be managed in a particular manner. So it's the same thing when it comes to chemicals. I can't speak from a personal point of view, but I can, but some women say that they are sensitive to certain smells. Some people, they crave certain things because of a smell. I don't know. That's what I've been told. So, ladies out there, you might be able to tell me different. So when you've got a pregnant worker that's on site, then you should run this risk assessment to make sure that everything has been done to make sure that she is comfortable in terms of that working environment. Okay, so you just need to take into account that. So is there health surveillance or monitoring required? So if you're working in a fairly dangerous industry, if you're working in the confined industry, in tunnels, in doing ducting and things like that, that's, you need to be careful in terms of that kind of environment, enclosed environment. Does there need to be surveillance in terms of, do they need particular injections to help them with their job? So if they're doing sewer cleaning or something of that nature, they're doing sort of jet blasting and that kind of stuff. So they need to be, you need to run a health surveillance to make sure that they're working within the confines, and they can work within the confines of your risk assessment. Again, one size doesn't fit all, and you have to make sure that you treat everybody differently as an individual. Don't take it for granted. So if we go down to point 12, excuse me. So point 12, and as I was saying, this goes back to what I was saying to Michael, where you can make things visual, make them visual. So you can see here we've got the different signs, blue and white signs that we've got. So face masks, whether they need a visor, whether they need gloves, whether they need footwear, respirators, goggles and overalls. Okay, and then other piece of equipment if necessary. Again, for those of you, and I'd like this to be part of our discussion before we finish, for those of you that have had particular challenges in terms of COVID-19 cleaning, etc., and the basics behind it, then I'll be interested to know how you manage this particular scenario in terms of what PPE they should wear. Is a PPE of a certain quality? Does your client tell you what kind of PPE to wear? I've had just an example, just very this morning, somebody contacted me this morning because their employer is now asking them to use a triple filter face mask. Now, she doesn't know what a triple filter face mask is, but you need to look at that. So what is it? What is the problem to wearing a face mask? Well, as humans, we're not used to having our mouths covered up for long periods of time. So if you've got a triple filter, remember, there's not a lot coming in. So how is that managed? How does a person able to breathe? Does the person have breathing problems to start with? Do they have asthma? That kind of stuff. Do they have a lung complaint? Do they have a heart complaint? So what do? Do you give somebody who's got got asthma and you give them a face mask that's got triple filter on it and it makes them hard to breathe anyway? How do you manage that situation? You're going to find that they're going to be probably pulling down the face mask on a regular basis. Is that allowed? I don't know. So they're the sort of things you need to look at in terms of, what kind of PPE to wear. Is it the right kind of PPE? Does it fit properly? Remember, it can't be altered or changed in any way. So, these need to be done in terms of when you're measuring the risk against a chemical, you need to make sure you've got the right PPE to wear. So what are the first aid measures? So the first aid measures, you'll get that from point 4 on the MSDS sheet. Don't invent the wheel. Don't reinvent the wheel. It will tell you on there what needs to be done in particular scenarios. So it will tell you how to deal with that chemical. If someone swallowed it, it will tell you what to do if someone's got it on their skin. You don't need to change that. So literally, in this particular area here, it's a cut and paste job. That's all you do. You cut and paste from section 4 what you need to put in here. However, what you can do is an extra measure is tell staff what to do, i.e. contact so-and-so or contact paramedics or dial 999 or 911, whatever the number may be. So you can put additional information, not a problem. But as again, what I said to you, you cannot water down the MSDS sheet. So take the first aid measures, put the first aid measures in there. Same thing with the storage. I think on the MSDS sheet, storage is number 10. So again, what you need to be looking at in terms of storage is your store up to scratch when it comes to storing particular chemicals. So if you've got a particularly toxic chemical, where do you keep it? Is there enough ventilation? Yeah. Is the chemical shouldn't be stored at height, so really shouldn't be stored where they say above eye level. But as we know, that could be different things for different people, different cultures, because some people are smaller than others. So if somebody has to reach over their head to get a chemical, especially a liquid, then that's not advisable. Have you got the right type of shelving? So is your shelving metal shelving, which can rust, can deteriorate, can corrode? Is it wooden? Okay. Is it plastic? That's also okay, but proper shelving. Make sure the shelving is cleanable. Make sure it's adjustable according to the chemical you've got. Is the room ventilated? So can you get a good change of air? Are there extractors? Is there a window you can open? Is there a door that you can leave open? But don't leave the door open, obviously, with the room unattended. However, so you need to understand what kind of storage you need for a particular chemical. Okay. Again, one size doesn't fit all. There's going to be certain situations, especially when you're in the bracket of toxicity, you probably, and highly flammable, you will need a separate cabinet. And if it's highly flammable, then you'll probably find that it needs to be stored outside. So they're the sort of things you need to look at. So disposal of a substance. For a lot of us, it's not really an issue. In most cases, if you've got something that needs to be disposed in terms of a chemical, sometimes you can just ring up the supplier and they'll come and take it away for you. Or for instance, at a low level here in the UK, we can get the local council to take it away for us. But if it's hazardous waste, then it needs to be identified as that. If it's going to be taken away in a skip, or if it's going to be returned to a depot, or even returned to a supplier, you can do that. But you have to negotiate that. But they're the sort of things that you need to identify there. So once you've done that, you've got the bottom bit here which says, is the exposure adequately controlled? So how do you know that? How do you know where it's adequately controlled? The only way you're going to know that is either to do it yourself to make sure that you've got the right scenario here, get someone to check it, then and write your method statement accordingly. So that's, you know, in terms of doing that, you just need to make sure that you're happy with that. Again, technically it's a legal document if things go really, really wrong. So don't tick yes because you think it's a nice to have. Make sure that you check. If you need to go back over something and think, well, I'm not quite happy with the PPE, then you just need to make the changes accordingly. So what are the ratings after you've actually got the control measures in place? So are they low, medium or high? So if the control measures and after you've done all the control measures, they're still high, then you need to, as a person or as a team, sit down and think, how can we bring it down to at least get it to medium? If it's impossible to get it from a high status, then what you're then going to have to do is extra surveillance on the staff using that particular chemical. And that's what you need to make sure that they're using that chemical correctly. The chemical is stored correctly, they use it correctly, they put it back correctly. Okay, and then last but not least, what you've got at the bottom, who was this assessment carried out by? Again, really it should be by a competent person. It should be a person who's got some sort of health and safety qualification, an IOSH to a minimum. NEBOSH, fine, but that's not a prerequisite, but they should have some sort of qualification, some sort of training to say that they've been through this particular scenario. Then you date it and then you have a review date, which again will be in maybe 6 months time or a year's time, depending on the type of chemical you're using and the environment that you're using it in. So I'll conclude for this period. Has anybody got any questions related to this before I move on?
Yes, Tommy. We have a question from Claire, who asks, what is the best manner to handle the cleaning chemical if staff keeps it in the bottle without any tag or description?
All chemicals should have the manufacturer's label on. If the chemical is decanted into a different bottle, and we're not talking about a drinks bottle here, but if it's decanted out into a prescribed bottle supplied by the manufacturer, sometimes you can get manufacturer's labels to put on them bottles. But at all costs, it should be avoided to decant chemicals into bottles or containers that it's not meant for.
Okay. Shijit Kotungal asks, what is the normal temperature for chemical storage? And I think he asked that before.
There's no normal temperature. You need to look at that on the MSDS sheet. Again, it depends on what the chemical is that you're using.
Okay. Mohammed Akhil asks, what is the emergency color code?
Okay.
What is the emergency color code?
What do you mean? I don't understand that. What do you mean by that?
I didn't get that. Maybe Mohammed, you could explain a little more about what you are trying to say. Apart from this, Rabi came back with his feedback regarding the term JHA, that is job hazard analysis. And he said that there are two terms, JHA, that is job hazard analysis, and POWRA, point of work risk assessment. These are common in highly confined environments like oil and gas, confined drilling, and so on in KSA.
Yeah. The power is POWRA, yes. Yeah.
And he says that they're also used in soft services operations. Strangely here, soft services to a great extent includes building fabric also. Right, okay. Yeah, I think he just had to say that.
Right, okay, that's fine. Thanks for your contribution.
We can move on, Tommy.
Okay, lovely. Can we move on to the next slide about training?
Yes, please.
The importance of training and development staff?
Yes, give me a second. There we go. Training and assessment. There we go.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I think somebody asked me about this last week in terms of the type of training, what training do we have for the staff, etc., etc. So for most of you that have been in our industry for some time, we know that by and large, the definitive in terms of accredited training and assessment is normally the big scenario. So the big scenario is where somebody is shown what to do and they replicate what you want them to do under assessment conditions, and you mark them accordingly. Now, again, you know, that is one form of training. The other form of training that we have, very simple, Toolbox talks. Again, I think it was Michael who mentioned it earlier on. Toolbox talks are a very, very good thing to have, especially when you've got lots of people to disseminate information. It's short and it's sharp. Now, by and large, a good Toolbox talk should really be about 15 minutes. What you don't want to do is, you know, turn it into a sort of sit down scenario. So it should be about between 10 to 15 minutes. It should be punchy. It should be straight to the point in terms of what you're looking for, what you want the staff to do. And it can be done on a regular basis. So this will complement your method statement and your risk assessment. Again, when you're doing Toolbox talks or any form of training, what you need to do is to evaluate that training. Has it worked? There's no point getting someone just to turn up, you read them from a sheet, you send them off to do their own thing, but how do you know that what you've told them actually works? So the key thing to training is about evaluation. Again, I don't have the definitive answer in terms of what training people would need within a particular organization. However, what I'm going to show you now, which Shanti will hopefully put up on the screen for me, is just a sample of a training matrix.
Just hold on, Tom.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so what we've got here is a training matrix. Fairly easy to use, it's not very difficult. So what you'll have down this particular column here is the name of the person who requires the training. And then what you've got across here is the type of training that you want to deliver to that particular member of staff or members of staff within a location. So again, this is just a sample. This is a sample that I use for a client based on his operations, what they do within the operations, etc. Now, one of the things that I say is make sure the training is relevant to the work the person does. There's no point training somebody in something they don't actually do, and unless it's an emergency procedure, obviously, which we don't want them to use. But when it comes to their day-to-day routine in terms of what they do, make it relevant. Now, you can overtrain in certain cases, and people will switch off, especially if they are not in tune with being in that kind of scenario where they're in a training environment. They're just not used to it. Again, it was mentioned in terms of how do we get the message across to people of different cultures, different language, etc., etc. I say again that the main thing for me would be to make it visual if you can. Okay, if you, in an ideal world, what you do is you make a short video, and then that could be overdubbed with somebody's language or subtitled, the case may be. The problem that we have within our industry is that a lot of the low-level operatives struggle even within their own language and their own culture to understand the materials that you're going to give them. So you're taking a chance, but what you need to do is make sure that you train in the first place. So one of the things that you could put together for yourself, and this is an ISO thing, it's also done in Sims and a couple of others, is have a matrix. So the matrix will tell you what it is you want them to train, and in this body here, that will tell you the date that the training took place. Okay, so you've got a visual there of what happens and when it happened. So in this particular case, if you can look here, this is a Toolbox talk on color coding, okay, in this section. So in this particular organization, when the staff join the organization, they would be taught that anyway as part of their induction. They would be taught color coding, they'll be taught how to actually clean, where they need to be cleaning, etc. But as a refresher, they go back and they do a Toolbox talk. Key thing is to, as I said, is to make sure they understand. If they don't understand what you're teaching them, then it's really, really difficult for you to say that you've done everything you can to reduce the risk in the workplace. How many times have you taught somebody and said, okay, red is for washrooms and toilets, and then gone out and find them cleaning someone's desk with a red cloth? Yeah, they're the sort of scenarios you're going to find yourself in. So I am not advocating any particular type of training. What I'm saying is expose your staff to training. Everything that I'm talking to you about here leads back to an awareness, it leads back into training, it leads back into retraining all the time. Okay, so what's the right training environment? So some of you may have your own training room, which is fine, kitted out in the appropriate manner. Some of you would use a client site. Some of you may just have a room. Some of you just even, you might even just train in the in a car park. I say it doesn't matter. It does matter where you train, but people have to be comfortable when you're training them. And you have to be able to, as a good trainer, what you need to be able to do is measure how much information could people absorb. Would they be able to sit in the same seat for 20 minutes, half an hour, a whole day? You had to make that judgment. The time of day they get trained. So I'll give you a really extreme example, and and what I'm about to say to you is a classification of really poor management in terms of managing the staff. So some years ago, I was running a 2-day supervisory course for my employer. We had a perfectly good training area, whiteboard, everything, tables, chairs, etc. I had about 15 people at training course, and after about 20 minutes, one of the guys, he fell asleep. Now I could have taken umbrage and thinking, well, he's fallen asleep because I'm really that boring, you can't be bothered. So what I done was I left him to sleep. I didn't wake him up. I left him to sleep, and then when we had a break, I woke him up. I took him outside and asked him if he was okay. And he said, yeah, I'm fine. I said, but you were asleep. He said, I'm tired, sir. He said, I've just come from my night duty. He said, my manager told me half an hour before he's due to finish work, he was going on a training course. How did his manager think he would react? This guy's body tells him that he finished work at 7 o'clock. He will be home by 8:30. He will be in bed by 9 o'clock to sleep after a night's duty. It didn't tell him that he'd be finishing his duty at 7 o'clock and by 8:30 he'd be sitting in the classroom. So that's an extreme what I'm trying to get across to you. But what you need to do is make sure, and where it becomes interesting is make sure the training is relevant, make sure it's easily understandable, make sure that you've got good visuals so people can actually see. We're in an industry where people need to see things. If you're going to teach somebody how to mop a floor, you can stand there and talk till the cows come home, but if you haven't actually got a mop and bucket and a floor to mop in front of you, they're not going to know. They're not going to do it properly, not going to interpret what you say, which again in turn increases your risk of a potential problem. So as I said, this here is just a matrix. So you can follow that matrix, you can have your own matrix, but if you've got one, it gives you a clear snapshot. So the types of training, say, I'm not advocating that you do any particular training, BICS, etc., because that would be wrong of me, and I don't know everything that's out there. You may have something from a local scenario where you can adopt. However, the key thing is, if you're going to train well and show them well. Once you've trained them, watch what they do to make sure they're actually putting into practice what you've trained. Where possible, retrain. Okay, if you retrain several times and you find that person's still not grasping it, then you need to make a decision what you're going to do with that person, because there's no point in training them to do a particular job and they can't do it, and then you find that, well, what am I going to do? You can't leave them in a job. Well, there's no point in training them in the first place. You might have just left them. So you need to work that one out. And this was one of the problems that we had, and I always had when we were training, and people asked me about training BICS. Fine, everybody knew where they were. There was a proper assessment process, which I advocate, which we call, in terms of this particular side, measuring outcomes. So you've got an assessment process. What do you do if someone fails? Okay, how do you manage that scenario? Okay, you can retrain them. So you retrain them, they fail again. You retrain them, they fail again. What do you do? At what point do you say enough's enough? And then when you get to that point, what do you do with that member of staff? Do you remove them from the operation? Do you send them home? Do you, I don't know, but you need to measure that. Because the reason why I say that is because if you've got two people working together and one person's been trained and he or she, they've passed their assessment, they're doing it correctly, and the other person has been trained but has failed his or her assessment several times, how could that be fair for the person who's already been trained and has done it successfully? You have to ask yourself, what is the point of training if you're going to put somebody who's failed into that working scenario? Okay. So, as I said, in terms of this last slide, if you put that slide up again, Shanti, this training slide, please.
Sure, Dominic.
Thank you. Okay, so in terms of, just to summarize, in terms of where we are here, the types of training will really relate to the job that someone's doing. So whether it be supervisory training, whether it be sales management training, whether it be health and safety, whether it be skills training, make the training relevant to the person and to the job they're doing. Use that against your method statement. Use it to manage your risk. Is the training right for the environment? So there is no point in training somebody how to do disinfect and clean if they're not going to do it. Okay, it's a nice to have, but why waste your resources? Put your resources into what they're actually doing. Are they using machines? Are they getting the correct training? Again, one of the problems that we face sometimes, especially here in the UK, is that if you've got a particular piece of equipment, just for argument's sake, a ride-on scrubber dryer, what will happen is sometimes a salesperson will come in and he or she will train the supervisor, the manager, how to use it. There's no measuring of the outcome in terms of, are they being assessed? Do they know what to do? Have they heard what that person is saying to them? So that makes life very difficult. Although they've received the training, there's no evaluation. Again, the other thing that you need to look at very clearly is a competency of someone who's training. Right? If you've never done a particular job, if you've never cleaned, it's going to be very hard for you to train and understand what the potential problems could be if you don't do it properly. So hence, that's why we have the skills training scenario. Measuring outcomes. So how do you measure an outcome? Yes, they get certification to say they've done it, not they've attended, but they've actually done it and they've done it successfully. Whether, as I said, whether it be BICS or another scenario, that's fine. But make sure you can measure the outcomes. Make sure that they can do it correctly, okay? And measure that. If they can't do it correctly, train and retrain. Always train, retrain. Just think of that one. Next slide, please, Shanti. I'm running out of time here. Can you give me an extra 5 minutes, Shanti, on top of this?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Guys, we'll take a couple of more minutes beyond the time that we'd designated so that we can complete today's presentation.
Okay, so this is the last slide for today. Again, so when we're talking about personal grooming, we're talking about the way the person looks when they turn up for work. I'm a firm believer that the way the person looks when they're at work, their uniform, their equipment tells you a lot about them, tells you a lot about the company. Okay, so when I say about personal grooming, there's jobs where you've got T-boys, T-girls, whatever the case may be. There's a certain dress code, okay, and there's a certain expectation in terms of what they do. In terms of cleaning, exactly the same. If you've got somebody who is wearing a dirty uniform, they're wearing dirty PPE, etc., in a shopping mall or a hospital, what image does that send out to you and sends out to the general public? Not a good one. Okay, you need to understand, or you need to let your staff understand that personal hygiene is something that needs to be dealt with. What you can't have is somebody turning up to work with a bad body odor. That again is not a good reflection, and there may be a very, very good reason why they, for want of a better phrase, smell the way they do. It may not be pleasant to us, but there may be a reason. You need to investigate the reason. It's not always about sending them to get a shower. It could be the fact that they're washing their clothes and they're not washing their clothes properly. Okay, so I'll give you again another extreme case, and this is a personal one because, well, there's nobody online that knows my son, but my son went to university about 4 or 5 years ago, and the first time I went to visit him, I could not bear to be in his room. The odor was unbearable, and I said to him, you know, are you taking a regular shower? Yes, Dad. Yeah, I'm taking a regular shower. But what he was doing was, because nobody had taught him, and I'm not talking about anyone in particular, whether it be me or my ex-partner, nobody taught him that when he washed his clothes, he needs to use washing powder. So as a consequence, the body odor within his clothes was just building up, even though you're just washing in water. Water wasn't enough. So, you know, there was an explanation behind it, but you had to explore that explanation. Hand washing today, as we know, is so important in terms of reducing the risk of contacting the virus, etc. Now, I think it's quite funny now that I've been teaching hand washing now for the best part of 35 years, and every group, there's always someone says, oh, why do we need to wash our hands? We're cleaning. Well, actually, now you can't do your cleaning without washing your hands. You need to wash your hands. You should wash your hands before you put your gloves on, make sure they're dry. You should wash your hands when you take your gloves off. Okay, simple. We didn't need COVID-19 to tell us that. We should have been doing that from day one. And for those of you out there that are BICS trainers and have been or been trained by me, you know the emphasis that I put on hand washing. You can do 10, 15 skills with me, but if you can't get the hand washing right, you cannot move past go. Okay, because that's crucial. So part of your dress code, so what do they wear? So they got proper dress code. Are they wearing the right uniform? Are they wearing clean polo shirts? Are they wearing clean high-vis jackets, etc.? Dress code is important in terms of recognizing the organization, what the organization do. Remember, your staff are an extension of your company. They reflect your company. If somebody sees something that's not right, or it doesn't look right, it doesn't smell right, people talk about your company. They don't talk about the operative because they don't know the operative's name. They talk about you as a company. So you should have a dress code in place. If someone turns up without their safety shoes, what do? Do you send them home? Do you give them another pair of safety shoes? If they turn up without a high vis, exactly the same. If they're a T-boy or T-girl, you know, you're expecting them to dress smartly, to have a waistcoat. The waistcoat should be clean. Their shirts should be clean. There should be no body odor. So that's all the expectations and standards that you expect from your staff. Yeah. Don't put in standards that you don't want the staff cannot follow. Make it achievable. Where possible, give them training. Even if it's just hand washing, train them how to wash their hands properly. Get them to show you how to wash their hands properly. I've now instigated, as part of the COVID clean for one of my clients, every time there's a site audit, the auditor has to check that this member of staff knows how to wash their hands, even though they've done it last month. Show me again. Show me how you wash your hands. Now, you cannot, like in most situations we hear, we cannot legislate for what will happen after you've left site, but you have to be satisfied within yourself while you're on site that their personal grooming is what you expect, that they wash their hands to the level that you expect them to have, and that you provide them the right means of washing their hands, that the dress code conforms to company standards, the expected standards for all your staff on that particular site. Okay, so I've exhausted the slides here in terms of where we are in this particular session. What I would like to do, if you want to permit, if you'd like to ask any questions about what I said or not said, then I'll be quite happy to take the questions now.
Thank you, Tommy. We had a question early on when we were talking about the COSHH assessment form. Dilip Bekal asks whether there is a color code for microfiber cloth depending on the risk of the area.
No, the color, well, yes, in essence, yes. I mean, if you, excuse me, and I can't speak for the UAE, I can only speak for UK. So in the UK, in the cleaning industry, we have four standard colours. However, there is no regulation saying which colour should be used where. What there should be is consistency. So, for instance, you have red, which is normally for toilets, for high-risk areas in the toilets. Although in this present modern day, every area in the toilet should be high risk. So you should have red. In some cases, you would have red to do the toilets, the urinals, and then you would have a different color, which generally might be red or white on its own, to do the rest of the washroom. Okay. Then you've got blue, which is for general areas. You've got green, which is generally for food prep areas. And then you've got yellow, which is for clinical areas. As I said, there's no hard and fast rule here in the UK about what colors are used where. What you should have is consistency. So if you decide as an organization that you're going to use red for your general areas, then so be it. But make sure that everybody uses red in that area and vice versa. If it's blue you're going to use in your washroom, make sure it's blue. But as close as you can, if you stick to the color coding that's recommended, which is red, yellow, blue, green, and maybe one other color, that you can't really go wrong.
Okay. Tommy, I don't think there are any more questions. No one seems to be typing anything.
Okay.
Is there any parting or ending remarks that you would like to make?
No, just like to say, I hope you can join me again in a couple of weeks' time for our next session. I hope you enjoyed today's session, and please, I'm not divorced from adverse comments. So if you've got any comments about something I've said or you've not liked, then please feed it back to Shanti. Also, if you feel that you would benefit from another topic in the near future, then again, feed that back to Shanti. And if we can then have another session, then fine. So until such time, which will be on February the 17th, I'd like to wish you all well and be safe.
Thank you everybody. As Tommy said, February 17th is the next session. This is when we're going to be talking about understanding chemicals, equipment, how to use them effectively, as well as robotics. So it's going to be quite an interesting one as well. Thanks for joining us and staying back for the couple of minutes that were extra. And we look forward to seeing you on the 17th, same time. Thank you, Domi. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye.